let me present the next two great speakers who exactly are going to discuss Europe's cyber resilience. How do we build that? Do we have it? How do we make sure that we prepare for the worst and hope for the best? I had the pleasure of meeting Timo Harakka, the Minister of Transportation and Communication of Finland, half a year ago, and once it opened up again. And it was great to hear that the new government, of course, are looking at how to invest in digital. It is also great to learn how they, of course, have just applied to join NATO. I would say finally. I think we can say that Finland has always been like a digital frontrunner, both in digital skills, in cybersecurity, in resilience, in education, and many solutions. Of course, the country also of one of our good members, Nokia. So Minister Harakka, he came recently from Davos, where he met the Ukrainian Vice Prime Minister and Digital Minister, Mr. Fedorov, and they discussed exactly Europe's cybersecurity and the admission of Finland into to NATO. So I'm very happy to have you online here, and thank you so much, and good to see you again. The other person, of course, being Casper Klynge, who is at the board of Digital Europe representing Microsoft. He's also the vice president of European Government Affairs. And of course, thank you, also a kind sponsor of this event today. Last week, Casper, you hosted the European Cyber Agora, a day for discussion of European cybersecurity and protection of critical infrastructure, an area where you have also been kind enough to work with Digital Europe on helping Ukraine to really create more resilience into the infrastructure. And it's a place where you bring stakeholders from policy and industry together to discuss these things. You, Microsoft, that being, have been really heavily involved and at the forefront of both detecting and addressing some of the cybersecurity attacks on Ukraine. And I think we can say that most of them were discovered and addressed by private sector, and amongst others, Microsoft. So with that, I will leave the moderation of this session to my colleague Alberto Di Felice, who is the specialist and director of cybersecurity and privacy in Digital Europe. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming here today, and I will enjoy the great conversation on how to build cybersecurity and resilience in Europe. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Cecilia.
Thank you,
Good
Cecilia.
afternoon, everyone. I hear my own echo. That's good. That's gone. So thank you very much. And I think the speech from the Deputy Prime Minister is a perfect segue for this. Some housekeeping. Since Cecilia left, I am very privileged to moderate this discussion, but I'm also in the unfortunate situation of being moderator of an all-male panel. So first of all, I'm going to apologize for that. But I still hope you're going to find the discussion interesting. And then we have, as usual with our panels, a poll question. We have two, actually. So I'm going to start the first one very quickly. So people watching us remotely can answer the poll question. The first one is, should there be more EU-level collaboration and action on cybersecurity? And we'll see the results in a bit. So this is, as the Deputy Prime Minister sort of alluded to in one of the last responses to Cecilia's questions, this has been a long discussion about the status of cybersecurity in Europe. It's a long one. It's a relatively recent one as well when it comes to EU policy making. It's hard to imagine that the first proposal, the big legislative proposal on cybersecurity in Europe, was put forward by the European Commission only 9 years ago. 9 years ago, we saw the first proposal for a directive on the security of network and information systems. We just revised that framework. And in the meantime, there's been a whole lot of action. Among others, we've seen discussions on cybersecurity certification. And these discussions will continue for the foreseeable future and will likely only expand in the future. But obviously, a lot of this has been accelerated by the invasion of Ukraine. So maybe the first question that I can ask Timo, perhaps from a broader perspective, clearly one of the results of the invasion and, if you will, bringing a lot of older discussions to fruition has been the fact that Finland and Sweden just last month both simultaneously applied to become members of NATO. So I was wondering whether you could, describe from your perspective what that means in terms of Europe's cybersecurity and security more broadly. So not only from the perspective of NATO, but from the perspective of the European Union. What does that look like?
Thank you, Alberto, and good afternoon from Helsinki. Yes, thanks for the good question. The fact in the matter is that Finland's accession to NATO strengthens our own security and the security and stability of the Baltic Sea and Northern Europe particularly. We like to say that we are a security provider, not a security consumer, and we are assured that our membership would strengthen further NATO, and obviously this applies to cybersecurity as well. In general, we have a credible national defense capability that's interoperable with NATO, a strong will to defend the country, and a high level of resilience in society. We are well prepared for various security threats, also in the cyberspace. And there the situation seems to be happily uneventful right now, but we have raised our preparedness and will stay vigilant. It's important that NATO and EU continue joint exercises, and that is one of the best ways to raise our preparedness. In Finland, we have a long tradition in exercising together with the private sector, including critical infrastructure operators. As a matter of fact, this is a vital part of what we call a total national defense, and it's very much private sector led. In addition to its strong NATO partnership, Finland has many close bilateral and multilateral partnerships in the security and defense sector, and we are a strong advocate of the EU defense cooperation.
Thank you, Timo. You just alluded to it, and Cecilia also mentioned this quite clearly in the previous session, and when introducing Casper. But clearly, a lot of the work on cyber and technology development more broadly is done by the private sector, and we all know that the aggression toward Ukraine was a cyber aggression well before there was a physical war in place. And as Cecilia said, Microsoft, of all the big players that are key part of the internet and technology value chain, has been really at the forefront of leading the cyber response before the war and during the war, which is still ongoing. So I think it would be very interesting for our audience to have Casper illustrate and give a bit of the background of what Microsoft has been doing before and during the war. Casper?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Alberto, and good to see you, and good to see you again, Minister Timo. And I'm actually very sorry not to be in the room with you today, but I had a plane cancelled early this morning, not because of cybersecurity attacks, I think, but because of the general strike that is ongoing in Belgium. But good to be here, at least virtually then. I think, first of all, I think it's really helpful that Digital Europe, through this summit, is sort of putting additional emphasis on what we are seeing around cybersecurity. And as many have alluded to previously, I think the backdrop of what is happening in Ukraine with the unjustified and unlawful war has really put to the forefront, I think, not only for those of us that are involved in digital issues on a daily basis, but actually also for, ordinary people, friends and families that are sort of now realizing that cybersecurity is not a theoretical issue that you need to be involved in if you are part of a big digital company like Microsoft. It's in fact something that can hit all societies, our institutions, the foundation of our democracies, the foundation of our values in a very hard way. And And I think, sometimes we refer to the war in Ukraine as probably the first sort of clear-cut hybrid war, where we've seen a very close coordination of cybersecurity attacks and then kinetic activities on the ground. And I think that's right. I think it's also important to say we have seen that elsewhere before, but perhaps what we haven't seen before is at the level that we're currently seeing unfolding in Ukraine, where we've had very specific targeting of critical infrastructure or government institutions, first via cybersecurity attacks, and then if not successful, then actually through kinetic activities, forces on the ground or missiles being fired away. And having spent the majority of my own career in the public sector, in government, the EU as well, I think what is interesting is that we're looking at a hybrid war, but we're also looking at a hybrid response in a way that perhaps we haven't seen before either. And what I mean with a hybrid response is that this is really a very good example of how governments, international institutions like the European Union, NATO, really is coming together with the private sector and trying to lean in and provide the best possible defense in protection of Ukraine's territorial integrity, but also its digital sovereignty, if you like. And Alberto, as you rightly pointed out, we've been, I think, very, very transparent in Microsoft in both publishing our data sets in advance of the 24th of February, even going back, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years before, where we put out yearly reports with sort of the findings we have as one of the technology companies that are, whether we like it or not, frontline responders to the kind of cybersecurity attacks that we're seeing. And we know, and we've said this publicly, that even before the war began on the 24th of February, Ukraine were in fact the second most targeted country worldwide, only overtaken by the US in terms of receiving cybersecurity attacks. But what we saw leading up to the 24th of February was, of course, a very significant increase in the number of attacks, but also an increase in the degree of sophistication of attacks, specifically targeting critical infrastructure, specifically targeting government data sets. And what we've been trying to do since then is, of course, working very, very closely with the Ukrainian authorities, trying to help them mitigate these attacks. A small example of what we've been doing is actually providing support so that we've been able to migrate 16 out of 17 Ukrainian ministries to the cloud. Because I think Cecilia also mentioned this earlier today, the cloud is, in today's digital world, the system that enables a company like Microsoft or some of our competitors the ability to provide state-of-the-art cybersecurity mitigation technology. So moving them into the cloud has been such an instrumental part of it. And it's also one of those things where, again, I'm speaking to an audience that are incredibly knowledgeable in this area, but if I speak to my friends or my family and sort of try and explain that in fact, in protecting your data, instead of then putting them in the basement and locking the door, the best way to protect data is in fact to put it into the cloud, because in the kind of world we're living in, that is in fact, increases the possibility to defend those data sets and decrease the vulnerabilities that we are seeing. The kind of support we've been giving Ukraine, not that it perhaps matters so much, but just wanted to throw a number on the table, is support in the vicinity of more than $200 million, really trying to lean in and also accept the fact that, neutrality is not an option, not even for a company like Microsoft. We have an obligation also to defend, in this case, Ukraine, to defend democracy, to defend sort of the European values that is really at stake with the war in Ukraine.
Thanks a lot, Casper. In the meantime, I'm looking at the results from our little poll. And it may be the first time in a Digital Europe poll, but we have resounding 0% for nobody wanting more EU-level collaboration and action on cybersecurity. That's very telling. So maybe that's a good introduction for the next question that I have for Timo, because as we said, I mean, cyber and the fact that Microsoft was publishing those reports going back a year before the attack really shows that cybersecurity really is an older issue than we imagined. But the war, I would say, has acted as a wake-up call, particularly for Europe, and it has generated a lot of reconsiderations of European action, from energy security to other things. So from your perspective, what is it that the war has taught us? What should it generate in Europe in terms of both policies and actions going forward, Timo?
Thank you for the excellent question, and let me start by commending Microsoft for their efforts helping the cyber defense of Ukraine. I'll come back to how impressive it all is in a minute, but in a more general level, the European Union has shown exceptional unity and efficiency in supporting Ukraine. It's often said that EU is at its best in crisis situations, and this certainly is a proof of that case. Early in March, the French presidency invited us to an informal telecoms ministers' council where we had the chance to discuss Ukraine, our resilience in the cyberspace, and our responses. And we had a really interesting exchange of view with some of the social media platforms on their role and responsibility in the crisis as providers of information, but also disseminators of dis and misinformation. This dialogue was continued in Davos as well, and I had the opportunity to meet for the third time the Vice Prime Minister Fedorov there. I'm very impressed by his achievements and his team's achievements in cyber defense, digital defense, or even social media defense. I think he's writing the textbooks of warfare to entirely new chapters to it. So certainly also in very most practical levels, the help that being given most generously by the neighboring countries in providing all kind of equipment and gear to Ukraine has been very impressive as well. But certainly there's a lot of lessons learned how we could be even more efficient in the future. And we're already talking with Minister Fedorov about reconstruction. And we've agreed broadly that Finland will be a part of reconstruction, both in digital government and in education sectors.
Thank you, Timo. Casper, we mentioned policy already, and I think one of the, probably if I can complement what Timo just said, one of the lessons clearly has been the transatlantic dimension in, if you will, the Western alliance democracies getting together has been one of the things that have really been very clear, couldn't be clearer from the war. When you look at what's happening in terms of policy developments at European national level, when it comes to things that actually work against that common objective of strengthening security, can you think of something that shouldn't be happening and probably Europe should reconsider?
I can probably think of one or two issues, and I'll come back to that in a second, Alberto. But actually, if you allow me, just begin on a positive note. I mean, Timo, you're being very modest in terms of sort of, the massive change in terms of how Finland is also realigning to the new situation. And I think in many ways, for those of us who can still remember the end of the Cold War, we have to pinch ourselves a little bit these days to look at the massive, I would say, tectonic shifts we're looking at when it comes to European security architecture and really transatlantic security architecture. Because, having Finland and Sweden apply for NATO membership, we have my home country of Denmark deciding through a national referendum to get rid of the defense opt-out inside the European Union. We've seen Germany massively changing its foreign policy. I think we really shouldn't underestimate how Ukraine has been a game changer in bringing Europe closer together, but also bringing transatlantic collaboration closer together. And I think for those of us who were, I don't know whether I should say this publicly, but we're very sad to see the UK depart the European Union. I think also just in the last couple of months, after the 24th of February, we've actually seen a UK coming closer together with Europe in many ways that I think is a positive step forward. So I think I just wanted to recognize that. And the interesting thing is, I don't think it really matters whether you work in a government or an international organization, or Alberto, like you, in a trade organization, or in a private company like Microsoft, to really be crystal clear in saying that I think we have strong interest in making sure that we contribute to a well-functioning transatlantic partnership. And we've had some difficult years, let's not hide that, where there's been increased tension and perhaps also skepticisms on both sides of the Atlantic. I think in the last year, we've really seen a resurfacing of strong emotions and a lot of embracing across the Atlantic. And I think that serves North America, Europe extremely well. It also serves the private industry enormously well. And you mentioned earlier today the Trade and Technology Council. And I think it was fantastic to hear, the Czech Deputy Prime Minister speak enthusiastically about a ambitious digital agenda, including looking at how we can foster closer collaboration across the Atlantic. Because I do think on the regulatory agenda, when it comes to policies around digital issues, we really need the US and Europe to stand closely together. We have a shared legacy of values. I think we have an interest in sort of a level playing field. Does that mean that everything will be agreed between Washington, D.C. and Brussels? No, it doesn't. But I think in 95% of everything, there is no reason why the US and Europe should not be able to collaborate. And I think that'll be good for politicians like Timo, for the European Union, for the US. It'll also be good for the private sector. I think, and then I'll try and answer sort of the negative question that you wanted me to dive into, Alberto. And I'm just going to be super honest here. I think what we've seen because of Ukraine is, of course, that the digital sovereignty discussion that was very, very, present in Europe has also been replaced to some extent by a focus on more traditional territorial sovereignty because of what we're seeing unfolding in Ukraine. But I also want to be super honest in saying that I think for most Europeans, and I'm certainly a European myself, the discussions around dependency, whether it's on energy or whether it's on digital solutions, whether it's on cybersecurity solutions, that is still present. And I think we have to acknowledge that there are valid reasons why a lot of European decision makers are concerned about whether Europe will be able to cut it in the digital age, will be able to develop the job creators, the big companies of tomorrow. So I think for many of us, we have to make sure that we lean in, we adapt to European concerns, that we help develop technology that gives sovereignty or control back to Europeans. I think, and this is the concern part of it, where we need strong leaders like Timo and many, many others, is of course to make sure that Europe doesn't turn inward looking, that Europe doesn't raise new walls where it'll be very, very difficult for those actors, including a company like Microsoft, that are totally committed to European values, to European regulation, that we will still be able to offer our state-of-the-art technology to Europe. And I think that dimension of making sure the regulatory discussion is not making it more difficult for all of us to operate in a Europe is the concern that I'm looking at.
Thank you, Casper. I think the numbers on our first poll haven't really moved, so we still have 0% for people who don't want any expansion of EU action in cybersecurity. So we'll probably bring up the second poll, which is about EU-NATO collaboration. So the second question is, should the EU and NATO be working more closely together in strengthening Europe's resilience? Let's see what happens. And I'm going to ask, if you will, a version of the same question, more about your general perspectives about EU-NATO collaboration, both to Timo and Casper. Timo, do you want to go first? If we can try to be very brief, and then I'll go for one or a couple of final questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. As a prospective new NATO member, we are very much in favor of also aligning our efforts together, particularly in cybersecurity. I would like to enlarge on the question a bit, because we often talk about existing security paradigms. But what I think that is really something that Sweden and Finland, with Norway and Denmark, obviously our Nordic brethren, would bring to the table is a kind of a Scandinavian concept of security, which has a lot to do with ESG issues. So we have a much broader kind of idea of security to start with. But yes, certainly we are already in the thick of it. For instance, there was a cyber exercise in Estonia the other day, and I'm very proud to say that it was a Finnish military team that came on top of that little competition. And to add, I think TTC is hugely valuable tool, and I would love to see it become a more structured, institutionalized way of strengthening transatlantic cooperation in digital and cyber issues.
Thank you, Timo. Casper, I saw a lot of nodding. Do you have anything to add there on EU, NATO, and transatlantic?
Yeah, absolutely. And just one word on what Timo said before. I think the TTC, we share that level of ambition that Timo mentioned before. In fact, we helped put together an open letter together with 7 other companies, 4 European companies, 4 US companies, where we made a number of recommendations, 9 to be very concrete, including around cybersecurity and resilience. So I think this is a fantastic show in town that both the private sector and the public sector need to invest in. And then when it comes to NATO EU collaboration, these are sensitive issues, and I'll be very cautious because I don't think it's the role of Microsoft to have strong views on that. But I do think that what we've seen is sort of the emergence of a distribution of labor, if you like, where the European Union is coming in with a very broad agenda around tech regulation, including around increasing resilience on cybersecurity. I think we have a broad range of different regulations, from the cybersecurity strategy to the cyber posture to the NIST directive to the Cyber Resilience Act, that is really going to be the Rolls Royce, if you like, globally in terms of increasing cybersecurity resilience in Europe. And I think that's great. When it comes to NATO, I was very, very privileged to be part of the GlobeSec Council on future security and defense policy. And one of the recommendations we made to the NATO Secretary General was, in fact, to create a high-level dialogue between the private sector and NATO around the economic security, and to be more specific, also to have NATO look at the role that it can play on normative issues around the application of technology in the military domain, but perhaps also lending in views on how should AI be used in a military context. And I think those are areas where, in fact, I think the European Union and NATO can work even closer together. And again, as I said before, when we look at what is unfolding in Ukraine towards the east, I think it has really highlighted the need also for NATO and the European Union to work together. And we're certainly supportive of that and want to help and be leaning in.
Thank you both. Can I just ask from the floor and see if there's any questions from people in the room? We also have a question that I think is for Timo that will be interesting from our online audience, from Jolana Mungengo of SME Connect. She's asking whether Finland would support more funding and competence for ENISA to enable closer EU-level cooperation in cybersecurity, particularly when it comes to enforcement. This goes back to the first question we asked. Timo, do you have a reaction to that?
I just had the pleasure of meeting Director Leppäsaari a few weeks back, and it's certain that we have a lot of alignment in our thinking of how we should help the private sector to enhance cybersecurity. Particularly, I'm interested in how we can help funding those very expensive probes to cyber systems, which also for bigger firms is a financial burden. And so we need to have incentives to help penetration testing in real-time environment. And this is something that we've talked with Director Leppäsaari, and actually the Finnish budget has already been amended to that end, that whenever ENISA is ready or the Commission is ready to bring out significant funding for SMEs and business at large to enhance the private sector cyber competencies. So we are ready to help with our national counterpart.
Thank you, Minister. And I'm afraid this is just about all the time we have for this very dense session. I want to thank you both. I'm just going to give the results of the second poll, which is a bit more nuanced this time around. So it's only 82.9% for yes, EU and NATO should be collaborating more closely. I'm going to thank you again, and Cecilia is back on stage. Yes, Cecilia, back to you.
No, first of all, I wanted to thank now, I don't see the gentleman anymore, but it seems that we have a lot of yeses to actually collaborate more on cybersecurity, and still we have the countries saying, maybe not, this is difficult. I want to thank Casper, I want to thank the Minister greatly for really these uplifting discussions and very concrete on how we can actually do that. And with the takeaway of private sector and public sector collaborating more, governments in EU collaborating more, and not least EU and NATO collaborating more on cybersecurity. Thank you so much for your great contributions and for your attendance here today. Thank you. Hand.